Hi, I'm Marcel, and welcome to me screaming into the void, mostly about books. The last time you saw me, we were in August, my favorite month of the year because it's Women in Translation Month. But then something happened. I'm at work and I had to put everything else aside, which means I had to put a pause on my project of presenting all 100 books from Biblibios' list of 100 most voted for women in translation books. So, picking up where we left off, I'm now going to very shortly present all of the books left on that list, divided between 2 or 3 videos. I'm not really sure. There are a lot of books left, so it depends on how long I can talk for. And the reason why I wanted to do that is because I am interested in looking at systems. I like looking at lists as a whole, not because of the individual books, but because of what can the list tell us. I don't expect you to read all 100 books and love all 100 books, because the books on this list is too varied for anyone to love everything on that list, myself included. I didn't read any bad books on this list, but I did read books that I loved, some of my new favorite books, and books that I thought were, well, it's okay, it's not my cup of tea. That is fine. We can't love everything here. But if you are interested in a deeper review of any of the books, please let me know and I'll make that. And I'll also, again, make this sort of analysis, my thoughts of in a separate video. So now, very shortly, going through the rest of the books on that list. Number 80, because we had to jump over 80 and 79 because they were difficult to get a hold of. Number 80 is Extracting the Stone of Madness by Alejandra Pizarnik. This is a book of poetry, and the theme of the book I thought was very interesting because it's a reflection of how language can make it difficult to speak, how we can struggle with putting things into words, or how things can, despite having the words for them, still not really feel like it is important, or that it sort of puts everything I wanted to say into praxis. And I just wanted to read one of the books here. The Words That Heals. While waiting for words to be unearthed by language, someone is singing about the place where silence is formed. Later, it will be shown that just because it displays its fury doesn't mean the sea or the world exists. In the same way, each word says what it says, and beyond that, something more and something else. So there you get the idea of what I mean with what is language and what is words. And I really enjoy that as a theme for a poetry book. Book 78 on the list is The Little Girl on the Ice Floe by Adelaide Bon. This is a memoir by a French woman who was sexually assaulted as a child, and how that has impacted her from the time she was a child and was sexually assaulted up until the trial when this man was caught when she was an adult. So she talks about her childhood and her adolescence when she sort of got a partner, got married, gave birth, and the fact that she comes from quite a privileged background. And what I thought was interesting with this book specifically is that she was believed from day one. So everyone so she went to the police, she got to the doctors. Because her parents were quite wealthy, she got pretty much anything she needed to do the healing process. And there was so there was no one who denied her anything, in one sense. But what she didn't get was anyone willing to actually talk about it. So while no one said that it's shameful or it's wrong to talk about the sexual assault, no one asked her about it. No one talked about it. No one gave her a language to understand what had happened to her. And the frustration that she felt growing up, not having any language to talk about it and understand it, and the ways that she sort of has to use the language that she gets as an adult to, in a sense, gain back her control over the narrative of her own story. Then we are making a jump because I've already talked about some of these books. And book 72 is My Heart Hemmed In by Marie Ndiaye. And this is, again, sort of talking about some of my new favorite books. I absolutely love this book. So it starts with a teacher. And we are in, I don't know really when we are, but she's a teacher and she is suddenly shunned by everyone, both she and her husband. And the entire book is just trying to peel back what is actually going on here. Why is she slowly being pushed out of all sort of social interactions? Why is she losing her job? Why is their children not wanting to talk to them anymore? We don't know that, and the main character doesn't really know that, or at least doesn't allow us to know that she knows it. So it's a form of psychological horror where the main character is ignorant, and because it's sort of written from a first perspective, we don't know what's going on. So we are just following along this sort of madness of a reaction to an action we do not know what is. Then we have book 71, The 10,000 Things by Maria Darmou. This is a family drama on a little island about a woman who is going through stuff with her husband and therefore has to move in with her grandmother. And the book is sort of about the relationship between her mother, and her grandmother, and the different sort of female roles that they take and how these different female roles interact both within the family, but also sort of in the society at large, especially with her grandmother, who is sort of known for being sort of a woman of the old ways, in lack of a better term. And what I liked so much about this book is how it illustrates so brilliantly the lack of communication between these three women, because life has sort of pulled them in so many different directions. So it really highlights sort of the difficulty of how can we, who love each other, who care for one another very deeply, coexist in a society where we all need to coexist. Book 70 is Confession by Kanea Minato, and this is again one of my probably new favorite books. It's about a woman who's a teacher who discovers that her two of her pupils has killed her daughter. And that's where the book starts. So the book the book is, of course, about how this woman reacts and the reaction to her actions, and also how different people are talking about and trying to understand what has happened, both regard to her reaction to this, but also in regard to why these two children have decided to take the life of a very young child. And it talks so much about the psychological aspect. It talks a lot from different people's perspective. We, for example, also get the perspective of one of the children who did this murder. And that was such a wonderful part of the book. So I can't really talk too much about any of the books, but this was so wonderful. My one complaint was probably that it was only talking about the relationship between mothers and children. Sort of fathers were just there in regards to all of the topics that she discusses. But again, absolutely wonderful book. Then we have a book 69, Arthur's Island by Elsa Morante. And this is a book about Arthur, who is living on an island with his father, and his father chooses to get married. And Arthur is sort of moving from the stage in his life from being a young boy who idolizes his father to having to come to terms with, is his father as perfect as he believed he was when he was a child? And this book is so Freud, it becomes almost comical. I started to, she was writing sort of very serious passages about how, and then suddenly he started to fall in love with this woman who was his father's new mother. And I was cackling because, of course, he fell in love with his mother. Of course he was going to do that because the book wasn't Freud enough. Book 68 on the list is History, also by Elsa Morante. And this is a book about a Jewish woman and her two sons in the time before, during, and after Second World War in Italy. And there are several things that I enjoyed about this book. One, because I hadn't read much about Italy sort of during the Second World War. And so it was interesting to just get a glimpse into that. But mostly what I enjoyed was the relationship between the mother and the oldest son, because this is a very poor family. And there is really nothing for the oldest son to be socialized into. There are no scripts. So he is drawn to Mussolini's sort of fascism. He becomes a part of youth groups that go around, and he gets a sense of purpose by being a part of these groups, while his mother is at home debating whether or not she is going to tell her son that she is Jewish, and by extension, he is Jewish. So he is going out beating up people for them having the same things that he has set in the eyes of this ideology. So the relationship between those two, and how the eldest son sort of just, the way he processes everything that he goes on. I didn't like the eldest son. By no means, he is not a likable character. But it is an interesting story to tell, and it's an interesting narrative to explore about, well, what if you are yourself Jewish, but still are drawn to a part of that because that's where you get your sense of purpose? Book 67, The Days of Abandonment by Elsa Ferrante. This is not part of her very famous sort of 4 books that started with My Brilliant Friend. This is an independent book, and it's about a woman who is, her husband leaves her for a much younger woman, and she is sort of left alone with her 2 children and all of the drama that ensues out of this action. And the book very, very clearly wants me to have empathy with this woman who is leaning out of windows and screaming to her husband that he is the dirt that she will walk on at some point, because what he does is so despicable, leaving his family and not least his 2 children, because it's such a difficult thing for her to process. Personally, I think I'm not that comfortable with that kind of displays of emotions. And I think Elsa Ferrante knows that. I think she sort of went in with this project to have empathy for this woman. And I don't know if I have empathy. I do have sympathy. I do have sympathy for what she's going through, for all of that emotions, in a way I didn't necessarily have sort of before I read the book. Not necessarily because I had contempt for them, but because I'm Norwegian, you're not supposed to have strong emotions, that you've lost control of yourself. Get it together, woman. So in that sense, I think one of her projects with the book in some way could have succeeded. Then we have Fox by Drubka Greshik. I apologize that I cannot remember how I pronounce any of these names. This is... It's something of a mixture of an essay collection and a short story collection. And it gets a lot muddled together, and I think that is on purpose, because what she is reflecting on and what she is sort of inviting you to reflect on is stories. How do we tell stories? How do we communicate ideas and symbols with one another? So the fact that you're struggling to figure out what is this, what are you doing, is just par for the course with a book like The Fox. Then we have The Queue by Bashma Abdel Aziz. Again, I think one of my new favorite books. I have to admit that I'm starting, as sort of the old fart that I am, to be drawn much more towards surrealism. And this is Kafkaesque surrealism at its greatest. So we are in an Arab country. I want to say Egypt, but I'm not 100% sure. But we're not sort of in Egypt. We are in a parallel universe where the government has created an authoritarian system. And if you want your case heard, you have to queue in front of these huge gates. And when these gates open, someone will come out and they will hear your case, and then it will be solved. But the gate doesn't open. And so the people who are waiting in this queue, and that is everything from doctors and nurses who needs permission to operate on certain people, to a teacher who has been accused of being sort of undemocratic and not loyal to the country, and therefore has to wait in the queue for to get her papers that she is a true citizen. I love it. I absolutely love it. So you have all of these people and all these stories that are standing there and waiting, and entire societies are growing out of these queues because people need to eat, people need to make money to buy drinks. So someone is setting up a tea stand. So she buys like something to cook her tea on, and she has this little chair as a sort of in the queue, and people come to her and they gossip and they drink tea, and then they go back to their spot in the queue, and then someone else comes, and it's such wonderful absurdist, but of course scary. Of course it's scary. I think that's partly the point, because is this really what we want, in a sense? But I think that's also what surrealism does so brilliantly. It's not just about things being weird for the sake of being weird. That's just bad writing. But true surrealist literature is a way of trying to give you something weird, but in a way that makes you think, oh. Book 64 is A View with a Grain of Sand by Wisława Szymborska. This is again a book of poetry, vignettes, again, stories, essays. It's not always easy to sort of put it into this is this genre. But I think also that's the point. I mean, you're trying to experiment. You're trying to figure out, well, what is this aspect? And she does, in her sort of book collection of texts, in lack of better words, focus a lot on the human absurd actions. And I don't mean absurd in the sense that, for example, the queue is absurdist, but more by highlighting one thing shines a light on something else. So you show two things by just highlighting one thing. And I'm going to read one of her, and this is a poem. This is part of a poem, and to sort of show what I mean with it. My sister doesn't write poems, and it's unlikely that she'll suddenly start writing poems. She takes after her mother, who didn't write poems, and also her father, who likewise didn't write poems. I feel safe beneath my sister's roof. My sister's husband would rather die than write poems. And even though this is starting to sound as repetitive as Peter Piper, the truth is, none of my relatives writes poems. My sister's desk drawers don't hold old poems, and her handbag doesn't hold new ones. When my sister asks me over for lunch, I know she doesn't want me to read her poems. Her soups are delicious without ulterior motive. Her coffee doesn't spill on manuscripts. So that's what I mean with talking about her sister also highlights herself and sort of the comparison of the life between that. So it's sort of what happens between people. That is the focus on her poems. Book 63, we have Faces in the Crowd by Valeria Lucelli. And this is a book between a Mexican translator in the US and the author that she is now wanting to promote and translate. So you have two sort of parallel stories going, and the focus sort of is because both are sort of writing their life stories. And of course, then it brings up in how can we trust our memories? How can we trust that this is actually what happened? And by having these two narratives in two different settings, but still connected through his writing, you can, in some sense, both confirm and sort of prove each other wrong, because she will write, and then I remember this and this and this about his writing, and he like, yeah, and then I did this and this and this about that writing, and sometimes it matches and sometimes it doesn't, because how can we actually trust our own memories? Book 62, The True Deceiver by Tove Jansson. This is the story of two elderly women who are living in a small village, and one of them is known for being quite aggressive and outgoing and blah, blah, blah. And the other one is not like that, and hiding herself and being very careful, at the same time being drawn to this blah, blah, blah character. And there are so many layers. And I love that in sort of when you're writing books that are more symbolic than anything else, because then you can really much put in, or you can at least sort of reflect on, well, what does this actually mean? What can I sort of put into this? Because the sort of more soft-spoken character has a lot of things inside, but she doesn't really talk about them because she is very afraid of the reactions around them. And this can, of course, be a comment on the village culture, that sort of when everyone knows everyone, it's difficult to stand out, or sort of the other sort of things that we carry with us. Or it could actually also be a comment on Tove Jansson's own queer identity that she might have sort of felt was difficult to share in a small town because there would be reactions to it. So we don't know if she specifically means her queer identity, but again, because it's all about secrets, you can put different things in it. You can read it as a critique of the Nordic culture where everyone, where you shouldn't really try to stand out, or you can read it as a form of queer sort of struggle with your own identity. There are a lot of ways of reading a book like this. Then we have book 62, The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir. This is a huge classical philosophical text about women and women's rights. Simone de Beauvoir is one of the main philosophers who talked about women not being born, but being created, that she is socialized into womanness. And Simone de Beauvoir, of course, talking about this in a quite negative way, because she's created into the other to do sort of the tasks that need to be done, but that men don't want to do themselves. And the aspect now of women being socialized into womanness and the otherness, and is sort of so commonplace now that sort of the idea that we have social roles and a social identity is sort of quite accepted. And you can discuss them, of course, but they're accepted that those are things. So it was kind of nice to read where that came from, or one of sort of the main voices that promoted that. Then we have Thus Were Their Faces by Silviana Ocampo. This is a collection of short stories that are quite unsettling, but you don't know why they are unsettling. Then you don't know, there is something just off in all of them, but you don't know what it is. And so you're sort of reading it with this sort of unease in you, trying to figure out when is the other shoe going to drop? What am I looking for here? What is going on? And she is, of course, one of the things I've learned throughout this project is that South America, with its magical realism, has so many wonderful horror authors, especially female horror authors, who have written these, again, psychological horror books where it's not what happens that is scary, but it's the why am I uneasy that is brilliant about it. And on spot 59 on this list, we have The Faculty of Dreams by Sara Strindberg. And this is a fictional telling of the real person, Valerie Solanas, who is most known for having shot Andy Warhol. So Valerie Solanas was an author, feminist, worked along a lot with regarding to sex work, as someone who had worked with sex work, with women's rights, with the queer topic, written Scum, where she talks quite negatively about men. Do we need men? She asks herself. But Valerie Solanas, I'm talking about the real Valerie Solanas here, is also someone who was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. And that was very clearly a diagnosis she had struggled with throughout her entire life, even if she was only diagnosed after having shot Andy Warhol. And she is also someone who grew up being the victim of a lot of sexual abuse. And despite the book being interesting, but despite the book sort of drawing a lot of parallels, especially around the view of sexuality and the use of the body in sex as an act, and the consequences of that, and what then happens to the owner of those bodies. All of that is so interesting. And yet I am struggling with that this was a real person. And this was a real person who was very, very sick. And what do we then do with that balance? What do we then do with understanding that? How do we ethically relate to the topic of that? And I don't have any easy answers. That was just, when, because I read the book, I thought it was very interesting. And then I read about who she was. And I just went, oh. So if you have any thoughts on that, let me know. By all means, there should be a discussion about it. On spot 58, we have just Poems by Sappho. This is, of course, the woman that gave us the words for sapphic and lesbian from the world of Lesbos, because she wrote love poems about women, being a woman, and they're so cute. One of the things about her poems is that I read a lot of, I don't know if it's irony or if it's sarcasm, but one of those things. And I assume that the irony and sarcasm is meant as irony and sarcasm. Based on everything else I know about what people have told me about Sappho. So, hopefully. But you never know. Then we have a mouthful on spot, 57, Mouthful of Birds by Samantha Schweblin. This is again South American short story author who writes this psychologically uneasy books where you sort of are, what is going on? What is this unease? What is happening here? What I really enjoyed with especially Mouthful of Birds, because sometimes when I read short story collections, it's very often quite fragmented. It's, I like that story, I didn't like that story, and that was fine. I enjoyed myself. But what I really enjoyed with The Mouthful of Birds isn't necessarily just the stories themselves, but the way they've been curated and the way they were presented. And I could see a very clear theme in how the stories started off fairly normal. I didn't actually realize that this was supposed to be like a thriller/horror book when I read the first short story. And then they became gradually just more weird and absolutely wonderful, but more uneasy the more I read it. So you had this sort of build up in her stories. So I really like the way that the short stories worked, building on one another. Then we have book 56, People in the Room by Nora Lange. Now, she is South American, but her parents were Norwegian immigrants, so that's why I pronounced her name the way I did. And this book was so wonderful. It's about a young woman who starts spying on 3 women across the street from her. And she is putting more and more, sort of the imagination that she puts into this becomes more and more insane. And you are really starting to, at sort of the halfway point of the book, I was really sort of worried that, oh, where is this going? No. Where is this going? Who am I following here? What is this person? Because you don't know it. You don't see it because she it's written from the first person. And so you're gradually pulled into this weird narrative where you are like, what is going on? And you just have to join in for the ride. And again, South America is so good at psychological horror. Such a brilliant, so many brilliant authors about psychological horror from there. And then we have book 55, Family Lexicon by Natalia Ginsburg. And this is about a middle-class family in Italy before, during, and after the Second World War, who are all socialists. And it was very interesting to read this book in contrast to History by Elsa Morante, because they're both talking about the same time in Italy, talking about the same issues in Italy, but where one is talking about the working class, family lexicon is talking about middle class. And so you're sort of getting two different narratives and two different views on the same things that are happening within Italy in this time. And the way that it's sort of, what do you have resources to do and who chooses to do what based on those resources. But be aware that in this book there is a lot of surprise racism. I mean, usually I wouldn't sort of point out that a book set in a fascist society will have racism in it, because to me, sort of, you should be prepared for racism when you are talking about fascism or Nazism. But this racism in this book caught me kind of off guard. So just a trigger warning for that one. Surprise racism. Then we have on spot 54, we have The Wall by Marlene Haushofer. And this is about a woman who wakes up in a small village. I think it's in Germany or Austria or that area of Europe. She wakes up one day and there is a wall, an invisible wall around sort of the cabin that she has been sleeping in. And everyone she can see on the other side of the wall is dead. So this is very much a science fiction story, and one of the topics I'm probably going to talk about. Very few of them on this list, surprisingly. But so the book then follows her and how she then keeps herself alive, the animals on the farm alive. And it's, in one sense, a very feminine book, in the sense that the focus is about life. The focus is about, how do I keep my body alive? How does my body react to things? How do I keep everyone else around me alive? And there are certain things where I was like, aren't you worried about X? But that the book isn't interested in, because it's more focused on this sort of theme of life and theme of survival, not just for the main character, but for sort of this society that she creates with herself and all of the animals. On spot 53, we have Memoirs of Hadrian by Marguerite Yourcenar. And this is a deep and dense retelling of the life and loves of Emperor Hadrian. And deep and dense indeed. What I enjoyed about this book in regard to that is, again, this is a very sort of feminine take on storytelling, where the focus is a lot on Emperor Hadrian's emotions. What did he think? What did he feel? What relationships did he have? It does have sort of these are the facts of things that happen in his life. They're absolutely present. But the story is more focused on the interpersonal relationships and how those things influenced what Emperor Hadrian ended up doing. Then we have the book on spot 52, which is The Lovers by Marguerite Duras. And this is about the relationship between a young French woman and an elderly Chinese Vietnamese man, both living in Vietnam at the moment. during, or I didn't quite get a grip if they were during the time when Vietnam was a part of France, or if it was straight after French had sort of moved out of Vietnam. Set in Saigon, and can I say it's very typical Margarita book? That might be very weird if people haven't read a lot of Margarita. For some reason, I've read a lot Margarita, and she talks a lot about the pain and drama of young women falling in love with men they shouldn't fall in love with. Yeah. And it's the high drama. It's soap drama dressed in high quality literature, and they're very short, very, very short. Drink some wine and read some Dura. On spot 51, we have Fish Soup by Margarita Garcia Raboya. This is a short story collection where the themes of all of the short stories, in some way or other, are talking about how we struggle to connect with one another, how we are sort of always not really seeing one another, how we are passing one another when all we want is connection. One of the things that I really liked regarding to reading this book, because it had to make me think about it, is that the book is written very lightly and very, I want to say, humoristically. I want to say that this is dark comedy, that it's meant to highlight the tragic themes in the book by writing it almost comedically. But I'm not sure. So if anyone else has read this book, please let me know if your thoughts on it is also that this was dark comedy in a sense, or if I'm sort of reading something else into it. Then we have book 50, and this is Seeing Red by Lina Morena. And this is about a woman who moves to a new place where she is struggling in general, because that's what a lot of immigrants do. But she is enjoying herself, and then she realizes that she's slowly going to lose her eyesight. And there is something so interesting with the way that it's written, with regard to so many of the repetitions in the languages. You, for example, have and this and that sentences after one another, or you can have sentences that are like my head, my hands. And the fact that there is something a bit sort of repetitious about the writing results in an almost manic or panicked reading of it. And I don't mean manic in the sense of out, but more manic in the sense of desperation. What is going on? Having some kind of control over this thing that is now happening with her, where she is slowly losing control over her eyesight in already a situation where she is so vulnerable, being an immigrant. On spot 49, we have Go Went Gone, written by Jenny Effenbeck, and this is about Richard, who is a professor who has just retired and decides to volunteer for an immigration group. And this book is the writing in this book is interesting in how it both highlights and doesn't highlight Richard's emotions, because the book is very introverted, but it's not introspective. And that, when you read it, it clashes with one another. So it's very introverted on Richard. It's very detailed on what Richard does. Then Richard does this, then Richard does that, then Richard does this. But it says so minimal about Richard's emotions. We have no idea what he is thinking or feeling on the inside in most of the book. So we just see him making all of these choices, but we are like, but why? Why are you doing this? What is happening? How is this impacting you? Why? What? Where are we now? So this way, this very sort of introverted book sort of forces you to then have to deal with Richard's emotions, or better yet, lack of emotions, because you then have to start thinking, but why is this happening? Oh, maybe this is the thing, or maybe this is what's happening, or maybe this is why he's reacting the way he's reacting. So we end up having to be introspective on Richard's behalf because the book isn't. Did you see what she did there? Then on spot 48, we have Strange Weather in Tokyo by Hiromi Kawakami. And this is about a middle-aged woman who, drinking in a bar, meets up with her old teacher, who is now in his 80s, and they form a weird relationship, weird friendship. And one of the things I started to think about The Maid and the Professor, because the stories are, in some sense, very similar, with the middle-aged woman and the elderly man, and an unlikely friendship who grows out of it. But what I struggled with in regard to this book, how much I unliked it, is I didn't really understand why this middle-aged woman, who was so negatively in how she was talking about her former teacher, why did she keep going out with him? What was going on? And the problem is, I liked the book. I really liked the book, but I was so confused by just this one point. So if anyone else has read this book, please explain, or read the book and just explain it to me. Because it's so cute. The book is so cute in how it highlights the importance of friendship and how easy it is in a society that is focused on the individual to end up being some kind of marginalized. So he is elderly. She has never married, doesn't have children. So the Japanese society doesn't really have any way of ensuring that they are a part of society. And that is important things to talk about. But why? Yeah. Moving on. Don't be alarmed of this weird clothing shift. It turns out I mixed up my Clarice Lispectors. So, on spot 47, we have the book Near to the Wild Heart, which is her debut book. This book follows Joanna, and it goes sort of back and forth throughout her life. And Joanna is described as a very free spirit. And this is, of course, something that both people are drawn to, but also people are pushed away. And the entire book, and especially the ending, therefore ends up being this discussion about what is best. Is it best to be free? Or is it best to have connections? Or can you actually have both? Despite everything telling us you can't. Now on to the regular program. And then we have Nada, or Nothing, by Carmen Laforet. We are now in Spain, right after the Spanish Civil War, which happened right before World War II. And Andrea is a girl who grew up in the countryside and has now moved to Barcelona, being 18, to go to university. And she ends up living with her family who lives in Barcelona. Her parents are dead, and this is a book that deals a lot with the trauma that the Spanish Civil War gave to its population, about how paranoid and how broken people were, especially the grown-ups, who were the ones who had fought in the war, fought against one another. That's what civil war means, after all. And when then Andrea comes, she was a child during the Civil War. She was sort of, in some sense, protected, yet not really protected, living in the countryside. So her only problem is that she just wants freedom. She sort of was protected by the nunnery. She was protected by the fact she was on the countryside, and she now just wants to be free. And this wish and desire to be free is then sort of straight into the trauma that her family in Barcelona has survived or not survived, depending on who you ask. And how do you deal with that? How do you deal with something that could so easily result in generational trauma? And the thing I really enjoyed about that book was, of course, Andrea and her character, because she's 18 and she has lived so sheltered. And it would have been so easy to read her as some kind of brat, especially when we, throughout the book, get these sort of small glimpses into the lives of all of the other characters that should sort of tell Andrea that things are so much more complicated than she thinks that they are. And they are just going straight over her head because she's not ready to sort of deal with it. She's not mature enough to deal with it. But that's the point. I was so stupid when I was 18. I was so stupid. Because you're supposed to be stupid when you're 18. You don't know anything yet. And that, I think, sort of endears me so much with Andrea, who is she's struggling with, why don't I understand why this isn't working? Because that's just something you need to learn and deal with. And how do we then do that in the sense that then of course, doesn't give Andrea all of this generational trauma? So Andrea was, to me, quite endearing, because I remember being that age and being that oblivious and self-centered even when everything around me says that I shouldn't be. So Carmen Lafora did, and she was just, I think, 23 when she wrote this book. So she did give a very warmth to Andrea without sort of explaining everything away. She's not sort of, oh, poor Andrea, of course she doesn't understand it. She really, so you know that Andrea is messing up here, but you can understand why she is doing it. And then the last book I am going to talk about in this video is book 45, Memories of a Polar Bear by Yoko Tawada. And this is a book about 3 generations of polar bears. I'm sorry. It's such a cute book. It's weird to talk about it because some of the themes that she talks about in this book with the polar bears are quite sort of dramatic. Again, because the polar bears are symbolism for otherness. And you could pretty much just put in any kind of otherness here. But you have 3 generations. But the way that she was writing, the way that she was presenting, and the voices meant that I just smiled throughout this book. Not because both because it's cute. It is cute, but also because it's endearing. Endearing was the word I was looking for. It's an endearing book. It's a book where there are 3 generations of polar bears. One who is an author, one who is working in a circus, and one who is working in a zoo. And the way they are sort of presenting how they are going throughout their lives, dealing with the otherness of being a polar bear. And it's quite endearing. And it sort of, it made me, I really, really liked the 3 characters in that book. So that was a bunch of books. We're going to end this video now. I'm going to make, again, either 2 or 1 or 2 other videos. So we'll just go through all of them, in addition to a video where I talk a bit about the list as a whole. What did I think about it after doing all of this project? Which were my favorite books? You might have picked up on some of my favorite books. So have you read any of the books on the list? What did you think? Do you want to read any of the books? Do some of them seem kind of enticing? And what are your favorite books by women in translation? And thank you for listening to me screaming into the void.